Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And I love the turnout. Thank you all for being here. We are now live on APSU-TV as well, so thank you all who are streaming and watching from home. Hopefully you're dry. I'm really excited for this conversation, and it's a timely conversation, so I appreciate you all taking the time to come out today. This afternoon, we are going to have our last engagement for our pilot program, the APSU People's Dialogue. And you can see the title here. It is the, so now what? Belongingness. And we'll talk a lot more about what that means post-election. What I want to say before we get into the conversation is that this is not a conversation around politics. This is not a conversation around partisanship. This is a conversation that may have some elements of reactions and feelings and thoughts and concerns post-election, but this truly is, and you'll see from the speakers we have and our guests and our foundational pieces, the elements of what it means to be community and what it means to post an election that we are trying to understand. How do we create a sense of belongingness within our communities at APSU, within our identity groups, within our spaces, within our homes, and how do we continue to really advocate for the things that are important to us because they matter. So as we go through this conversation today, if this is your first time here, we'll talk about what the People's Dialogue is. We'll invite our guests up, but first I want to honor and thank you all for taking the time to show up today and be a part of this conversation, okay? So for those who don't know who I am, my name is Christopher Clark. I'm an Assistant Vice President in Community Belonging and Success. I've been in my role since May. In my capacity, I've been charged by Dr. Clemens and the Vice President of Student Affairs to create a culture of belonging within 4 different areas. Our Latino Community Resource Center, our Adult Non-Traditional and Transfer Student Center, our African American Cultural Center, and then our Office of Career Services, with the emphasis of community belonging and success. Ironically enough, our speaker that we have, our outside speaker, a lot of the work that I've tried to instill in the office has been a part of my terminal degree, my dissertation, and now my postdoctorate work. So I'm honored to have this person here because a lot of the things that I'm trying to embed and instill in the work that I'm doing is a testament to the work that he's committed to long before I even thought about pursuing my doctorate, which I was crazy to do that, but I'm done. Right. With that being said, if you're watching online, if you're home, I would love for you all to engage the best way you can. There'll be multiple ways that you can engage. There's a microphone there. Those of you online, you can leave comments, and we have QR codes where you can share. But think about questions that you would like to share throughout this time. And really, the goal is to create a brave space throughout this time so we can really create community and know how to move forward, okay? So for those of you who are either new to the terminology or unfamiliar, before we get any further, I thought I would ground the conversation in what sense of belonging is. And I don't know if you probably figured out Strayhorn 2019. That's probably the person that's in this room who has cited this work. And the book to the right is a book I'll be talking about shortly that we have in many of our offices. So if you're thinking about what does belonging mean, what does sense of belonging mean, and why is this attached to something related to post-election engagement, right? So if you read the definition, it's the students' perceived social support on campus, a feeling of sensation of connectedness, the experience of mattering or feeling cared about, accepted, respected, valued by, and important to the groups. And groups meaning campus community or the campus, meaning faculty and peers. I think I don't need to elaborate anymore to determine why that's always important, but why that's especially important now given where we are in this country. So the intentionality around having this People's Dialogue and connecting it to the post-election and understanding what belongingness looks like is important. It's inclusive. It's all-encompassing of every person in this room. We want that for everyone. And hopefully when you leave this conversation today, you'll have a better sense of how to do that, how to advocate that, and how to share if those things aren't a part of your experiences, okay? Quick agenda of what we hope to accomplish in this time. One, welcome and overview, which I will provide a little more. We do have one of our student leaders who provide remarks from a student perspective. And then we have a panel of both internal and external stakeholders one of which is Dr. Strayhorn, to talk about this topic in a lightning talk fashion, but also answer some of the questions that you have shared when you registered, and then create space for you all to come and ask questions or share your perspectives as well, okay? And the last but not least, one thing we would never do, and we don't support or encourage this, we don't want you to leave here heavier than you came in. We don't want you to leave here helpless. We don't want you to leave here feeling like you don't know what to do. So our goal at the end of every conversation or dialogue is to give you resources, to be able to give you something practical to take out, whether that's learning, whether that's support, whether that's knowledge, so you can apply it, so you don't walk out feeling more of a sense of a burden and helplessness than you did when you came in, okay? So with that said, to provide some student remarks, I'd like to invite up to the stage one of our student athletes and member of SAC, Mr. Richard LeBron.
How you guys doing today? My name is Richard LeBron. I'm a student athlete, a part of the men's cross country program, and also here today representing SAC and also the subcommittee of Ellis Initiative. And as a group, we kind of look to try to create a safe and also inclusive space for all our athletes. And I know today's a very important event, especially for our campus, and just trying to kind of reflect on belonging and having that feeling of unity within us. And especially during post-election time, and as an athlete, I know I have a platform and a voice that I'm able to use to hopefully actually create a positive change in our community throughout this time. And honestly, I'm grateful for this opportunity today, and I hope I could contribute to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. What he didn't say is that many institutions, especially institutions that are have a very rigorous and large athletic program, sometimes there's a dichotomy between what our student athletes experience and what students who aren't athletes experience. And your presence here signals that regardless of where you are in the institution, there is a value in having you all come together and create community. And it's my hope that through SAC and other mechanisms that we can create community, so that whatever your student athletes are experiencing and need to know, we can also allow some of us in student affairs and other parts to be able to create community. So thank you so much for the remarks, and Richard will also be a part of the panel later on. So thank you. Okay. So for those who are attending the People's Dialogue the first time, I think it's important just to reset for a second. This dialogue is an inaugural initiative by the courageous leadership of our president and vice president and many of the senior leadership team, and with the co-lead of myself and Dr. Gilmore, who's here. We know that as we enter election seasons or years where there is some form of unrest and contention, we don't want to not create space for learning, understanding, and engagement. And we presented at a Student Success Summit at Knoxville. We were one of the few institutions that were addressing these topics very courageously and intentionally. These are risky things. These are hard things to do. We don't know what the response is going to be, but we have a responsibility and obligation to not run from this, to create brave spaces. And we're better off because of that. I come from a field of prevention and not treatment. So prevention is, how do we create spaces so that we don't have to react to things that you don't know and don't feel? So thank you to Dr. Clemens for believing in this and supporting this. Thank you to those who are involved. Thank you to our institutional partners, the Office of Institutional Culture, SAC, CAFE, our academic support space, and I might be missing, and student government and student affairs for creating these spaces, because it's important. What does it entail? So this is an evidence-based approach that we have modeled out, and we've tested out in 2020 and beyond. This is what will happen in this conversation. We don't want to just get up here and talk to you and lecture you. We don't want to create a space where there's not engagement. We want to be very robust in how we create spaces. So what you see here is a number of components that ground the work that we do in this dialogue. First, as we engage, we want to have a set of community agreements. So before we open it up, we want to make sure we're grounded by what our understanding is of engaging in good faith. All right, so I'll get to that point. We also want to make sure that what we're talking about and doing is accessible. That's why with our partnership intentionally, and thanks to the Department of Communication and APSU-TV, there are folks not only at APSU, but across the country that are watching this right now because we both have an in-person and YouTube streaming ability. Obviously, this is a relevant topic. I don't know how many conversation spaces we've created post-election, but this is an important one because we want to know how to create community post-election, relevant topics. We want to elevate the voices of the people who need to be heard. And so when you registered, you were able to submit questions. You're able to share feedback both formally and informally. And then we also have a student perspective. We have a faculty members and a dean's perspective. We have an administrator, and we also have an outside expert that can provide some context with you throughout this time. Guest facilitators. We want the experts here that can talk to us about what is and how to be better. We want to combine a combination of training, but also discussion. So we have a hybrid approach. So we want to engage you for learning, but we also want to have a discussion with intentional questions, which you'll see shortly. And again, as I mentioned before, we don't want you to leave this space without having something to do. Action items, how to hold us accountable, how to share, how to make whatever you hear better. And so this is these are the core components. These have been vital in how we've created community in various capacities, and this is what we hope to do today. Okay. So with that being said, we will start this conversation off with our panel. Okay, I'm not going to allow myself to butcher and undersell who they are, but the format for our guests is almost from a grassroots to 80,000 foot view. So we think it's important to have internal stakeholders to talk acutely about Austin Peay, to talk acutely about Clarksville in the state of Tennessee. So we have internal stakeholders. But then we also want to talk about, from an 80,000 foot view, what does this work and these experiences look like, and what does this information look like, and how is it paralleled or not across the country? So with the folks that you see on this screen, you have a combination of both of those experiences. And so what I would like to do first is invite all of our panelists up to the stage so they can sit down, and then what we'll do is allow them to introduce themselves. We'll give both Dean Williams and Dr. Strayhorn an ability to share their perspectives on the topic, and then we'll open it up for the panel discussion, okay? So without further ado, I would love for you all to give a round of applause to our outside panelists, which we call the People's Panel, as they come up to the stage, and then we'll do some introductions of them. So without further ado, panelists, come on up. Thank you all. So first and foremost, I would love for our outside speaker to introduce themselves briefly as to who you are and whatever you would like them to know before we go into your portion, and we'll go down the line to allow each to introduce. And Richard, you can share and introduce yourself again. So, Dr. Strayhorn, take us away. Yep, we're going over. Yep.
Good afternoon to everyone. Glad to be here. First, thanks to your president, your vice president, to Dr. Clark and his colleagues. I'm Terrell Strayhorn, delighted to be here. I am Associate Provost and Professor of Education and Psychology at Virginia Union University, where I also serve as the Director of Research for the Center for the Study of Historically Black Colleges and Universities, and have committed myself through my research and teaching to the academic study of belonging, but also tied directly to student success, and looking forward to the conversation. I am originally from Virginia Beach. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And that's it. I think that's all I got to tell you. But I'm looking forward to the conversation and really, really encourage you to use the QR code to ask questions.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Delynn Williams, and I here at APSU, I'm the Dean of the College of Behavioral and Health Sciences. By training, however, I'm a political scientist, and so I think that's why I was asked to be part of this panel. However, I am an internationalist by training. My expertise is in international politics and international security, and also essentially how identities are developed and utilized in state building. So I think that was part of what I'm bringing here, but that's my role at APSU.
Hi, I'm Richard LeBron again, and I'm not as established as these people yet, but working my way to there.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Gilmore. I currently serve as the Associate Vice President for Campus Engagement here at Austin Peay. So just really quickly, the four areas, kind of like how Dr. Clark had talked about, that I've been charged to work directly with are housing, so housing and dining, so the folks that live on campus, eat on campus, our student life and engagement, so leadership, student organizations, Greek life, community care and standards, our care team, conduct, and then community engagement and sustainability, where we take care of student basic needs and a lot of other things as well. So happy to be here and glad you all are here as well.
Thank you. Okay, so first, we would like to have Dean Williams spend some time just speaking a little bit about her perspective, her experience. She talked about her background around the topic. Your lightning talk begins now, Dean Williams. Let us know how you would love for us to be engaged with your work.
Okay, no worries at all. So thank you very much for taking your time, and I'm so thankful that honestly you're engaged. One of the things we'll learn about the political process is that engagement doesn't end with voting day, right? Engagement goes on way beyond that, but I understand that part of my role is to explain what happened during the election, what happened with voting, and if this is any part of larger trends in the United States. So I thought I would start with that, just so we can understand a little bit about the most recent election and a little bit of local information really about the state of Tennessee. So I wanted to share with you, and that's what you can see behind me, about the competitiveness of the state of Tennessee. So as you were watching the election results, and many of you came, and I'm so excited, I think I see some of you that came to the viewing party that was sponsored by the Political Science Department and Public Management. The issue really is, you'll hear referred to as battleground states, right? Battleground states are states that remain competitive. What that means is a percentage of the population that tends to vote for Republicans and the percentage of the population that tends to vote for Democrats are very close. The state of Tennessee really has not been competitive in the past 20 years. The state of Tennessee has been solidly Republican and even increasingly so. And so because of that, you might wonder why presidential candidates tend to not come to Tennessee, right? They tend to go to battleground states. So that's why you saw the presidential candidates in Georgia, you saw the presidential candidates a lot in Pennsylvania. Those were states which could swing states very closely with a small number of voters. In fact, some presidential elections have been decided really by less than 75,000 people. They just happen to be in certain states. Okay, so I wanted to kind of give you a background of that. In the 2024 election, what we did see, however, was we saw that both parties turned out their base quite well. So the Republicans turned out their base quite well, so did the Democrats. What we saw that was a little different than the previous election was we saw that what we refer to as low information voters, they tended to show up in less numbers. Now, a low information voter doesn't mean you're not bright or you don't pay attention to other things in your life, but it could have been just people sick of politics, right? And those low information voters have always been with us. But they tended to not come out in this election as much as they did in the last. So the real story in the election, particularly in the battleground states, is counties, and if you were watching, right, all the wonderful maps, right, counties that tended to be super blue tend to be in urban areas, right, and suburban areas. Those results were tended to be about 2 to 4% lower for Kamala Harris than they were for President Biden. That swing of that 2 to 4%, because they're very populous areas, then causes things to go into a different direction. You'll also see that in Tennessee, we have fairly low voter turnout. We can talk about why. Dr. Bednarzik from the Political Science Department was part of the last dialogue, and I want to touch a little bit on what he talked about. We see in the United States an increasing amount of what we call mega identities, right? Overlapping social identities that also happen to go with political parties in the United States. This is nothing new. So the book that you see that I listed above that is very dated in a way, we look at these things when we look at nation building. Harold Isaac's work was really foundational as we look to state building in Kenya. If you think of all of the colonial occupation, those states aren't natural. They don't really go together in any way. There's a variety of ethnicities. So because of that, those things had to be rebuilt. Now, what we find, however, is often an elite or an individual who capitalizes on constructed identities. They then do what's called strategic myth-making. And they create an identity that is somewhat false, but somehow hooked back into a past history to then give salience to a constructed identity. So while this is scary a little bit, the other thing is, when this happens, however, I want you to understand that we construct identities together. So if at Austin Peay we choose to construct an identity of openness and belonging and contribution and facts and information, we do that together. And that's the power, actually, of identity construction. You don't want to give that away to someone who will manipulate that in strategic myth-making based on people's low information. And so if there's something that you want to take from the election and take from what we've seen in other countries, I think that's the largest takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you for that, the history lesson, but also the connection to the topic, especially around as it relates to the identity. And I see Dr. Strayhorn taking notes. So yeah, any responses or anything that you would love to respond or add value to anyone else before we go to the next slide, just in case. We want to make sure we create space for that. Not for the audience yet, but for a panel. Great. All right. So without further ado, Dr. Strayhorn, you are up to talk about belongingness.
All right. Thank you, Dean Williams, for those comments. So let's talk a little bit about belonging for a few moments. Sense of belonging is exciting to talk about because it actually does not, it's sort of a great segue off of what Dean Williams shared, and that is sense of belonging is a basic human need. It won't matter if you're rich or if you are less rich. It doesn't matter it's not determined by, or your need to belong is not determined by your height. It's not determined by your weight. I like to say in public lectures, whether you're full size or fun size like me, you want to feel a sense of belonging. Let me show you. By a show of hands, how many of you in here want to have a friend? It's a population. There are only 2 people who have ever said no to that question in this entire nation. I think the 2 of them should get together and not be friends. But what it means is that everybody yearns, even while you're walking around campus, in the dining area, on the playing field, in your mind, your body, your actions are motivated by your desire to satisfy certain needs. Well, on the screen is one framework borrowed from psychology, first made famous by Abraham Maslow years and years and years ago, who helped us understand that as humans we all have needs, and they sort of are ordered in his framework hierarchically. That we all need air, we all need water, we all need food, we all need sleep, we all need sex. That's what Maslow said, not me. But you got to get some, and I'm talking about air, elevate your mind, right? Because without it, higher order needs cannot be considered. These higher order needs are things like safety and security. Part of that is physical safety and security. We want to know that we're at a campus, that we're in a classroom where I am not subjected to physical harm. But what I've learned from my research over years is that it doesn't stop there. That students also want to learn in campuses and in classrooms, laboratories, where they are free from and safe from psychological danger, emotional threat of harm, that I won't be called by a dead name, that a faculty member will honor my pronouns, that I can also believe that the content that I'm exposed to, even if it's a perspective or a mindset with which I disagree, that the classroom will be structured in a way where everyone can amplify their voice. All perspectives can be heard. That we can debate and disagree without being disagreeable. And so these are just fundamental principles of community that also have huge implications for pedagogy, what happens in the classroom, outside the classroom, and the like. That's in that model. When we can create those kind of spaces, then love in community is possible. But as I've been telling my psych class this semester a lot, I'm teaching positive psychology, that you've probably heard this phrase that actions speak louder than words. And the thing we've learned, I think, from the election and before and after, is that, we have a lot of words in this country. And people can say a lot of things. And so I get excited when I get invitations from institutions to come to sit on panels like this to talk to the students and faculty and staff about the importance of our words. One, we got to honor, from a belonging sense, words matter. Words can hurt, but words can also heal. That's why we come to universities, if for no other reason than to learn words, to learn what to say, what not to say, how to assume positive intent, but never deny negative impact, right? Just because I assume positive intent, I got to also admit, I tell my best friend this all the time. Listen, and he's in higher ed. He's like, oh, you have to assume positive intent. I'm like, no, bro, that hurt. What you said hurt me. And friends don't hurt each other. I can assume positive intent, but we got to talk through the process. So if you have not already, take some English courses, take some writing courses that expose you to a lexicon of words to learn how to communicate with even those who you fundamentally and strongly disagree. Democracy depends upon it. That if you haven't already, you should take courses in political science, not just political science majors, but everyone, to understand how government works. As Dean Williams mentioned, in this last election, we listened to lots of candidates along the way who had ideas and pitches and promises that actually, quite frankly, aren't easily possible in this country. Not with our checks and balances. And I know we'll come to this, so I'll save time for that. But there's one. I'm a professor in education. I teach primarily in schools and colleges of education, and I'm also, my tenure unit is in higher education. So this idea of getting rid of the U.S. Department of Education is one that a lot of my students often, clutch pearls about. And if you understand how laws are made and how changes are enacted, it empowers you to be able to discern what any candidate might offer as a part of their platform pitch, to know that we still live in a democracy and we have checks and balances, and there'll be a process that we'll have to go through for that to enact. But the other thing that I'm teaching tonight for my grad course, I'm going to be talking to my students about, is the fact that we got to understand what is the role of the U.S. Department of Education in this country. There's lots of polemics in words about giving education back to the states. Well, the states already really control education in this country. They're funded by your property taxes within states. There is a role for the federal government. We'll talk about it. Most of us benefit through student aid. But I think this is time. Thank you.
Hey, I don't know how to follow that up, but I'm gonna listen to some. I'm gonna repeat some words, and again, hopefully, both of these short conversations or presentations have prompted some dialogue, questions, or answers or responses. So if you haven't done so, start to think about what things you would like to share, and the mechanisms for asking and receiving questions will be available shortly. But it's interesting, as I wrote down some notes: intent versus impact. And what I heard, you didn't say it, but I heard a lot about this word accountability, right? Because your intentions could be good, but words hurt, right? But words can also heal. And then I also love the parallel between Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I think we sometimes often don't think about Maslow's in other contexts, but it does. It is vital to the way in which we can belong, and the outcomes are very clear when we can do those things. Okay. So, being that words matter, words can hurt, words can heal, intent versus impact, that was a nice segue into our dialogue, okay? So now here's a portion where we'll be able to now engage in conversation. And before we do that, we have something called our People's Agreements. These agreements are designed to ground our dialogue and conversation in a responsible way, okay? So as you can see, I'll read them and I'll talk about what these mean, so that you are aware of how we plan to engage when we open up the floor. The first is, as you share, we want you to speak from your experiences, okay? Period. You can talk broadly, but your experiences are important, okay? Individualization is a very important thing. So be sure to represent yourself as you're speaking. Listening to understand, not to respond, is important. We may hear things that are hard to hear, new to hear, things that we disagree with, but understanding is the most important part. There's more impactful, beneficial places you can go if you want to be contentious and have a debate. This is not the space for that, per se. This is to listen to understand, not to respond, okay? I think there's a lot of discomfort. There's a discomfort in what's to come. There's discomfort in maybe the questions that may be shared about what to do, about what I may feel. Discomfort is okay, embrace it. It's a part of growth, it's necessary, okay? Back to intent versus impact. Assume positive intent, but own your impact. I think Dr. Strayhorn touched on that pretty nicely. Vegas rules. And Vegas rules for me, and it's hard to kind of apply that to those who are watching online, and this is recorded, but what is said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here. We're creating brave and vulnerable spaces, so if somebody is vulnerably putting themselves in a position to ask or engage and learn from a good place, don't hold them accountable for that when they leave that space. Recognize that what they're doing is brave and help educate them. Hold them accountable if they continue to perpetuate the thing after learning, but allow them to have a Vegas experience, which means that when we leave here, what we see and experience stays, what we learn leaves. Be open to challenge and change. We know where we are, and contribute to a brave space. What I mean by that is, again, you will have opportunities to engage. I'm challenging you to try to engage when the floor is open, from questions, from comments, because your participation in this is important. Your peers may need you to be brave, and bravery may come from going to that microphone to answer a question, to ask a question, to submitting anonymous questions, which you'll see very shortly, and to be an active part of this conversation. If you're online, you also can do the same thing, okay? So those are our community agreements. With that, we will now move into the question portion. So there's a QR code in the right side. If you are interested in submitting anonymous questions or questions that you would like us to consider, you can submit those there. I will receive those in real time, and depending on the question and time, I will ask the question, or when the floor is open, you're willing to walk up to the microphone. What we've done since you registered is we've curated a number of questions that you all asked when registering, and we are going to put these on the screen for first our panelists to respond to, and then we'll give you a chance to respond to. So based on all the questions that were submitted, here's one of the first ones that were submitted that we want to respond to. And it reads, overall, what can we do to create a brave space that supports belonging for our community? And the follow-up to that is, what are some tips to bring the campus together and celebrate the community that we have? And as this works is our panelists will be able to answer first in no particular order. So whoever feels compelled to answer first, please feel free to do so, and then we'll go from there. So that's one of the first questions that was submitted from you all in the audience. So panelists, any takers?
So I'll hopefully can do this cumulatively and add, right? So the thing I want to bring to the conversation, which I often bring, is let's focus on also understanding and level setting around the language. So brave space, what is a brave space? And I think brave space came out of some literature that talks about the fact that, you know, there used to be this language we kicked around called safe space, and that was what the field loved for a while, until we realized how problematic it is, that safe spaces aren't stickers on walls, and you don't designate something safe without me having input into the process, but that we must create spaces, much like Dr. Clark is talking about, where all perspectives are heard, all people can feel free to share their perspective, they will be acknowledged, and space will be held for them, or you might have to create it for yourself and others. So that's something we have to think about. So how do we create that space that supports belonging? I think, one, we're sort of modeling this as a community today. Here's what I would say about belonging, and I say it a lot in my writing. Belonging does not happen automatically. Everybody wants to feel a sense of belonging, but it doesn't just happen. We've got to co-create it. I teach in psychology, you know, it is easy for us as humans to judge. If you think back to when you were, well, I was probably the same height, but just younger. When we were kids, right? And we play that little game where it's like a picture of a horse and a duck and a frog and then a baseball baseball, and it says like which one does not belong. See, I don't know anything about sports. Let me stay in my lane, right? And it tells you which one does not belong. Everyone loves that game. Why? Because you know the baseball does not belong. We can judge quickly what does not fit in, what doesn't go along with. The hardest thing for us to do as humans is to rationalize why there are similarities across items. What is the connection between the baseball and the horse? And for us to create and imagine, remember at that model, it's at the highest level of that model where that kind of thinking happens. So I'm saying that to say we want belonging, but we often think it's going to happen automatically. We have to create it. So the thing we got to do is we got to get out of our comfort zone. We have to get to know each other. We have to listen. I'm talking for real listen, not listen to respond, but listen to understand. So that's your journey? Wow. So those are your hobbies. Man, so you're in this major. Why? What do you want to do when you're done? Such as you could repeat after. And there's going to come a time where you get to share your story, but too often in this country, quite often, and outside this country, I won't pick on just the U.S., I've been places now, happens in other places where people just want to rush to tell them what you're doing. So I think when we can create and develop our empathy, get to know each other, I'm going to say this hopefully later too, for campuses, one way we do this is through traditions. If I have any concern for higher education is that we don't have enough traditions. Yeah, we do commencement, but what are the other kinds of things that you will do and learn as a student at Austin Peay? Like, what's special about being a student at Austin Peay? And there ought to be something, I don't know. In my fraternity, it's a secret handshake. There's certain traditions, there's certain things that only bona fide members know. And there's a way that we can use that metaphor to create that kind of connection in community here. I think that's the way you do it. Some tips for it. I'm going to leave it to my colleagues to add to that.
The only thing I would add to that is inside that space, you must have authenticity. However, that authenticity can be frightening. And so one of the responsibilities, I think, of us as administrators here at Austin Peay and even as faculty members is to make sure that space is available so you can be your authentic self. Now, the interesting part is you have to then accept that as others are their authentic selves, they're going to be quite different than you are. And as you have that sense of friction, cross-cultural clashes, right, of whatever that may be, our goal is, my hope is to help you navigate through that, right? And we've all experienced those things. But our goal is to help you as you experience those things.
What are some tips to bring campus together? One thing I would definitely say this campus actually does really well is I really feel monthly there's a lot of events going on always on campus, whether it's throughout the MUC or just through the sports or even through fraternities. There's always like some event going on every month, which I feel like really does bring the campus together, just whether students, student athletes, faculty as well. It does bring us really just to celebrate us as a university, but also as a community. So I really do believe as a campus, we are well at that and we still have more room for improvement.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that. I'm really glad to hear you talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Dr. Strayhorn. I think especially in student affairs, that's kind of our bread and butter, right? I talked about housing earlier and how that's one of the areas in my portfolio, but I think, kind of lay the foundation and the groundwork to help make sure those base levels can exist so that those higher levels can hopefully get there eventually, right? But I think that work can expand beyond just student affairs administrators and can expand to other staff and faculty and even peer-to-peer amongst students. So I think that's a challenge that I'm going to give folks that are here today, as well as those listening online, watching online, is how can you help create some of those base levels within Maslow's amongst the communities that you exist in currently. I think that's important. I think as a staff member and an administrator here, I think it's important for me to role model the way. And so you talked about authenticity, Dr. Williams. So I think that's also important. That's kind of also where I live a lot, is kind of what you see is what you get, right? So I think authenticity is really, really important. But I think also as administrators, we need to ask this question to our students and to ask, what's the expectation of belonging and community that you have of Austin Peay, right? So what does this look like so that we as administrators sometimes, we can be guilty of thinking one thing and it's not actually what students want and need. And so I think that's something that we can do, especially right now, post-election, is ask those questions and to see what is needed by not only our students, but by our fellow staff members, by our faculty members. How can we all come together and work together to make our community stronger? And it's going to take time, right? Building something is brick by brick, and it takes time and patience, which can be difficult. So.
Well, I appreciate every comment, and especially from thank you for bringing the distinction up between safe and brave. And, I'm not as up to date on the literature, but I always have said when I hold spaces, I can't guarantee your safety. So it would be negligent of me and a disservice to me to say I'm creating a safe space. Knock on wood, that light could fall right now and hit you in your head. And I told you this is a safe space. I can't guarantee it. But I can tell you what it means to be brave and what it means to be brave for the sake of what we all mentioned. And as administrators, I think, at least for us, what is powerful is what we know about what is working and what isn't working. How are we asking questions? How are we collecting data? How are we getting information that allows us to know what your experiences are and what it's linked to? And if we choose not to engage you and model that through our leadership, but also ask questions that show collectively what we are providing is either contributing positively or not to your experience, then that's on us. And you can't hold us accountable to that. But I do love the distinction of, authenticity, brave versus safe, but also being a model for the work that we're doing. So thank you all for sharing that. I think that's really, really valuable. Okay, the next long question. And then after these questions, if you have responses, I would love for you to come up and add perspective after the next few questions. So the next one is, what steps can we take to foster a sense of unity and support, especially for individuals with strong worries or who may feel uncertain about the election outcomes? And then the follow-up to that is, the election may have brought to light for some that their beliefs differ from those in their various identity groups. How do we reconcile that impact on our sense of belonging within that group? That's a doozy. So good luck with it, whoever would love to take that first. And if any audience member wants to also take a stab, open to that as well. But yeah, panelists, any thoughts on that? Any part of that question you would like to address first?
I'll take that on first.
Oh, thank
then
you.
someone
Thank
else
you,
will help
Dean.
me. No, I think the first thing is, for me, it's to acknowledge the fear. I think that we have to, as we go through this path, we have to acknowledge that our paths are all different. And so because our paths are different, maybe the level of fear is different, right? Because we're all coming from those different places. The other thing, though, I think you have to acknowledge, though, is the power. I think sometimes we lean into fear and we forget that we have power. This is what a democratic society is. A democratic society is significantly more than voting. I hope you guys know that, right? Voting is pretty much the very bottom of the participatory scale, right? So a true democratic society is created by the people. And we are so blessed, because we have not always been this in our history, that we are actually part now of that creation. And so while we can focus on the fear, which I think is very real, I think we also have to focus on the agency. And to lean into that agency, no matter what your political viewpoints are, is incredibly important. And to understand how you can do that is very important. And so as a political scientist, I'm like, yeah. So we're all in the arena, right? Right? Because we know that democracy is definitely a participatory sport, and it is not something you just watch on television. Right?
I think it's also important, and I think Dr. Strayhorn may have been the one that mentioned this, is to understand how our government works and how legislation works and how policies work, both at the federal, state, local, but then also institutional level. I think sometimes fear is bred out of the unknown, and it's really easy to grab this little device and open it and find what it is that we may be looking for, or maybe what we don't want to find. And there's a lot of interesting rhetoric that exists right at our fingertips. And so I think some of it is to recognize that fear. I think that is very, very important. And then to be a good consumer of the knowledge that exists out there, and to figure out what is maybe potentially the reality of some of the things that we're hearing. The fact is that, you know, none of us have a crystal ball, right? If I did, I don't think I'd be sitting up here, right? We'd be somewhere making millions of dollars being able to predict what is to come. And so that can be a very hard place to sit in, is that unknown that can then lead to fear. So I think it's recognizing that and understanding that and becoming a good consumer of what exists, what checks and balances exist out there, and how, as Dr. Williams said, what agency do each of us have that we can step in and potentially be involved in ways that we're comfortable in exercising the rights that we have.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's think about this, right? I want to echo the sentiments of others. One is, you know, that's where I was going to start too, is if the question's about worries, it's okay to not be okay. That's what I want to say. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to worry. It's okay to be unsure. In the book on belonging, I have a section where I talk about pluralistic ignorance. It's what it's called in psychology. It's how humans experience the world. We all walk into a room like this and assume everyone knows. If you don't know someone, you assume everyone knows someone. Everyone's got a question in mind. Everyone understood the lecture. Everyone got a better grade on the test than you did. And what we have to do is just reel that back in and help ourselves understand we made a lot of assumptions when we led to that. And it's okay to worry. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be unsure. That's very human of all of us. Regardless of your political perspective, your height, weight, social class, that's very normal, very usual, typical. Second thing that I want to sort of pick up and echo is that differences have been amongst us way before the election, right? But when we operate under assumptions, we always assume, you know, like you said, use our own story. So my heart is racing, but I'm going to do it. Right. So the day after the election, I got like 8 texts from friends who are not my race, who said things like, "Hey, brother, praying for you. Hope you can make it through the day." You know, another text that said, "Hey, man, praying for you that, you know, and the world, the nation right now." And I thought, you know, I was confused because I thought, well, one, I'm not your brother. I've got 2 of those. And then 2, I thought, wow, look at the assumptions that are being made about my own political perspective that I have not shared because we don't talk about politics, because we create brave spaces where we can engage in this conversation. Thank you for that very strong nod in the back. You know, and then I thought, dang, how do you respond to this, right? Because if you say, so it happened. And I had that moment, and I had the energy. And then I leaned into it, as was said, the discomfort, and realized on the other end of this phone is a person who cares enough to send a text. A person who probably intended to do what's right. A person who's made assumptions about me based on my research, my race, my family background. I don't know what it is, but they came to some conclusion and thought, I'll offer some support today. And that allowed me to find a way to hit reply and say something kind back before the National Day of Kindness, which I think is today, right? So I'm saying that to say it took a lot of work, friends. I was laying in bed looking at my phone thinking, who the heck do you think you're, and you probably, you know, all this stuff went through my head because I'm human. And I realized at the end of it are a number of assumptions that we all make. And that's embedded in this question, that we all make assumptions about who's around us. But let me ask you this as a way to lift us out of that feeling. How many of you in here, especially to the students in here, how many of you want to like have a good job when you finish your degree here at Austin Peay? Okay, how many of you want to make like good money when you're done? How many of you want to make great money? How many of you want to own your own business? All right, cool. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. For those online, listen, I'm trying to tell you, as an entrepreneur, your best idea, your most highest paying client may be different from you, may live in a country where you do not live, may have beliefs and values that are not your own. This is the training ground, the space where you develop the facility to talk to people who are different from you, to talk to people whose perspectives are different from you, to learn how to diffuse a situation and bring down the heat very quickly, to learn how to find interest in something you're not really interested in. But you do it in a way that's authentic, and you learn how to act small talk. That was something I did not know as an undergrad. I did not know as a grad student, but owning my own business taught me. I've got to figure out how to have small talk. I am not a sports person, but I got to get into it because I got clients who are into it. And sometimes before people will talk to you about the contract or even about a job offer, they want to talk to you about you and your story, but they also want to share theirs. So I think what we learn from this election is it gives us an opportunity to get to know people who are different and to lean in, to ask questions, and to not be so offended just because, you may have voted for someone who I did not vote for, but that does not mean that we don't share something in common. My grandma, when she was alive, would sing this song that says, there's a bright side somewhere, there's a bright side somewhere. Don't give up until you find it. I often think about that in these kind of contexts because sometimes you got to keep talking. You got to hang in there. You got to ask questions until you can find that point of connection. That's what community comes out of. And it is possible for all of us. The problem is we get exhausted, and that's natural because it's hard work. Yep. But hard work is no excuse for retreat, especially not for those who are in college. But I think college is that kind of space where you can make mistakes and still recover. So my advice is you reconcile it by being human. At the end of the day, you don't have to feel perfect. You don't have to have all the right questions. Listen, we're going to make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, we just say, oops, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say it that way. But can you help me understand what word should I use to ask this question? How could I inquire more? Or is there a YouTube video or a TED Talk I should watch to learn something about this? Open yourself up to that kind of learning. I think community and belonging is possible.
That's a word. So now I'm going to say one of the things I've always said is sharing is a gift. And sharing, number one, good, bad, or indifferent, gives you access to someone's thoughts, feelings, and you can do something with that. Either you can choose to retreat, or you can lean in, or you can have perspective. So as we transition to the next question, I would love for a demonstration of bravery from our audience to share or to ask by coming up to the podium, and then we'll go to the next question from there, because I would love for some of our folks to share. And please introduce yourself to us. And thank you for your bravery as well. Let's give a round of applause for your bravery. Thank you.
I don't love talking on microphones. I would often rather scream than talk on a microphone. But I wanted to ask Dean Williams, you told us to focus on the agency and learn how that works. Could you provide an example or two of that just to elaborate a little bit?
Sure, no worries at all. So as a U.S. citizen, of course, one of your greatest, I think, rights and gifts is you have the freedom to assemble and you have the freedom to petition. So many of you have issues that are very close to your heart, things you really believe in. There are organizations that support your issues. There are organizations here right on campus. You might end up later seeing a QR code. But there are organizations right here on campus that will support your issues, that will support you. But as you do that, the really important thing, though, is to not silo yourself off with only people that have the same viewpoint as you do on an issue. One of the most, we'll say, painful cross-cultural moments that I had in my career was there was a situation where there had been a death in my family. I approached an individual of another culture and I said, hey, I don't think I can take this exam today. I just found out that my brother's child was stillborn. They said to me, no, it's an exam, you'll take it. right? I was like, wait a second, I don't think you got what I just said. Didn't you understand what I said? Right? I'm like, you don't get me. And they're like, yeah, but you don't get this. You will take the exam. I was so floored, and I was offended, and I was hurt, and I was like, this is impossible. But as I understood more about the culture that they came from, the situation that they had, they grew up in a situation where they were no longer permitted to speak their language, where they were occupied, where they lost their voice. This was a small thing in their world. They couldn't understand it. And so that's what I mean, where you have to have those dialogues, and then you have to see their perspectives. And while I might not have agreed, I'm telling you all this information so that you just kind of understand that, well, yes, you can have agency with groups you feel comfortable with, but the real growth I had in that situation was understanding that culture. And then I became a lot more comfortable in that culture, and I understood it much more deeply.
Thank you. And so as I go to the next question we have on this slide, again, if you have questions and you want to either respond to any of the prompts, you can all line up at that microphone. We will give you license to speak, and we would love your participation. But while you all courageously line up and ask the questions in the audience and write in the chat, I'll read the third question, which as it relates to social media, because that's been a huge role in recent elections, okay? So what role, if any, does social media play in creating or destroying a sense of belonging and community? And panelists, you can answer, and then audience, if you would like to ask questions or respond to any of these with your perspectives, please feel free to go to the microphone or submit something anonymously. So, any takers first from the panel?
I'll speak about this one just a little. One of my interests is something called the operational information environment. The operational information environment is social media spaces where stories are initiated that have an interest of an entity most likely outside of the United States. So one of the things that came up that I had really a lot of conversations with students was about the situation in Gaza. And one of the things that came up around that was, where were the sources of this information? When was it released, and who was amplifying it? And as the students did a little bit of research, they realized that it was amplified by non-humans. And as it was amplified by non-humans, then the question was, then what is the real purpose of this? The purpose could be to change US policy. The purpose could be something else. And the folks that sound just like you, or might appear that they are linked to your ideas or your concerns, might actually not be those people at all. And we know that some entities that are not allies of the United States, but not saying the United States is not involved in this game as well, we are, tend to amplify particular voices, and they are very, very active, and there are huge amounts of information manipulators out there in cyberspace that act directly against US interests. So when you see some of these things, you have to ask those questions first.
Well, I know with social media, there could come many positive and negative things out of it. And especially with just the type of information that's spread out there, like you were explaining, sometimes it's not even actually a human entity actually like throwing out these ideas or stories. And I feel like as us humans in general, just should really try to learn how to differentiate like like pretty much a false narrative to the actual true story. And that does come with actually maybe doing some more research on the topic and just reading into the sources, because in general, in this time of, like, in this day and age, we really, like, a lot of the times on social media, there's so many narratives being pushed out there, and it's really hard to really know which one's true, because once you start liking one video, more videos are going to start popping up of that, and it's really just being aware and conscious of that and understanding that really just the social media has a very interesting way of controlling the narrative on either side.
So when you see a post, first thing you look at is look at the commenter, see if the commenter has friends. often you'll see that there are no relationships to the commenter. This will be one of the indications that that commenter is likely not human. So then, just FYI, as you look through all those comments then, if you see that all of those non-human comments are tending to echo another non-human commenter, you will have a pretty good idea that that information is being manipulated that you are picking up on.
I think that there's a lot of, I think COVID taught me a lot about the positive and negative impacts that social media has, right? I think what's lovely about social media, how many of you have friends, family, loved ones that aren't within a very easy, hour, 30-minute drivable distance you can connect with? I'm sure all of us do, right? So my family all lives 4 hours away from me. And so during the pandemic, it was lovely to be able to, catch up with them on social media and to be able to get little snippets of their life and feel like I was connected to something greater than me when, my world shrunk during the pandemic for safety reasons, right? But also there's a downside to that. I think social media can be very isolating and can negatively impact our sense of belonging and negatively impact our ability to interact with our community and sometimes even our self-worth. And so I think that that's a reality that we just need to be aware of. I think that a lot of people can be emboldened on social media. So while we have AI and non-human type interactions, we also have some emboldened individuals that, if we want to call them keyboard warriors or whatever vernacular we want to use, there's definitely folks that feel they would say something on social media that they wouldn't say to your face, right? Because it's much easier to do that. So I think that's a real impact too. But it also is kind of that game of telephone where we see, maybe the original content was 100% accurate. And as we, cut it down to snippets, to digestible nuggets that social media requires us to, we lose the real story behind it. And so exactly, I think researching things and paying attention to what the commenters are, but also realizing that it's social media. And so what value are you going to put on some of the things that you're consuming at the same time, and how does that impact you?
I mean, what more is there to say after all of that? I think if I were to take to our timekeeper, let's see, 30 seconds. Everybody take out your phone real quick. Got your phone? Get your phone. Get your phone. Y'all got them, smart devices. Everybody, the most recent poll says that there are more Americans with cell phones than toothbrushes. So everybody's got a cell phone, and get close because nobody has a toothbrush. All right, so get your phone out, go to your camera real quick. Y'all got it out? Why are y'all so awkward? You use this phone any other time? There you go, thank you. All right, turn it to your little self. Get yourself a selfie. Lean over to your neighbor. Take a groupie. Come on, y'all can do it real quick. Y'all got dressed up for the event.
Those
take
of you
a picture,
at home,
take a picture, take
do
a picture.
the same. Those
yep,
of you at
home on screen. There, love it. I should do the same. I'm talking myself. All right. Listen, post it on your favorite social media right now. Tag Austin Peay. Use hashtag community. Listen. If you are not on social media, put it in the family group chat and let them know that's what you're up to right now. Here's why I'm saying it. Because we use social media so much to talk about, like, we got on the test and I got selected for the sorority and I made the team. And it starts to set this expectation that everybody's life is better. And I'm afraid because if you go to universities, you'll see, videos and clips of football games and sometimes homecoming, but we don't have enough clips of this where we get together as a community to have brave conversations so that people who aspire to go to college realize, wow, that's what college is like. And to the over millions of Americans who started college but abandoned their plans to say, man, I could go back today and I could be a part of these kind of conversations. That's why I think it's really important. Social media can be used for that. I know I'm not speaking at you, I'm speaking to all of us. I've said to my team, I'm very much going to post, because I fall into the trap too. You're exactly right. I was looking at social media the other day, someone posted something about something they were honored to do, and I thought, man, I want to do that. Before you know it, I started feeling bad about myself. And then I was looking at another person's post, and they had a new book out, and I said, I need a new book. And before it will create this tendency. By the way, by the time I got to my fourth one, I realized I had not liked any of the 4 that I read. So we lose hours of our own life scrolling through other people's and never engage, never liked. Now, when I realized this, I went back and intentionally made myself like the post and put a comment. Because, first of all, their success is not at my expense. The same is true for us here. But again, these messages are not automatic. We got to tell ourselves. We got to tell each other. We got to share each other. I think social media is a powerful tool, but like most tools, it can be used to create or destroy. It's all in the power of the user. So I'm going to encourage us to think about ways that we can use it to create community around the principles we're talking about.
Beautiful. And Timekeeper is going to keep us going, but that was great. And please post those and tag us. And so as we go to our next part, which we're going to be wrapping up shortly, we may have to abbreviate some of the questions. But what I also will say is, to add to that really briefly, don't underestimate the impact that you have and the responsibility you have if you are somebody who is an advocate for creating a sense of belonging when you post things on platforms like LinkedIn. Okay? So remember, you are representing yourself in a way that can either create or destroy how people feel like you are going to be a person that they can create a sense of belonging with. So you also have a sense of responsibility when you post, not just for the sake of posting accurate information, but from the post of representing yourself in a way where people feel like you're still a part of the good side of creating community. And oftentimes in LinkedIn, we may end up unintentionally alienating ourselves from people because what we say and what we post online don't match. And then you create distance from those who you feel like, wow, this is not what belonging looks like, and this is what it felt like, but this is what you choose to share on those platforms. So be careful of LinkedIn as well. All right, so our last set of questions, and I actually got one that was submitted. We'll just ask two this time, because one is about faculty and staff, and one is about the political science departments. These are the last two. So how will political science departments at colleges and universities across the nation discuss the impact of the election in a balanced and thoughtful manner? Good luck.
So the political scientist is supposed to respond to this. I think the important thing is, as we've talked about, is figure out how government works. So one of the things that I think the average American does not know enough about is honestly how Congress works. So one of the things that you have to think about is you're going to hear a lot about that the Republicans control the House and the Republicans control the Senate and the Republicans have the president, so they've just ran the table. You're going to hear things like that. The real question about that is that if a party controls a House or the Senate, what that means is that party tends to get the majority on House or Senate committees. These committees are important, however, based on the subcommittees that exist there. So committee politics inside Congress can essentially, a chair of a committee, if they want to kill a bill or kill an idea, they assign it to a subcommittee that will be dysfunctional and that will kill it. So all of these committees that you think about and all legislation tends to be sent to committee. Therefore, there's a long road. So maybe when you were young, you heard about, I'm just a bill here on Capitol Hill, right? The reality is it's not that simple. The reality is that there's tremendous amounts of contesting between things, and as well as all those members of Congress also serve a caucus normally. They also serve a party. Remember that the individuals in the House, many are going to go up for re-election in 2 years, particularly moderate seats. They're afraid of losing because then the House will swing back. There are a lot of factors in place that will impact those changes. So in political science departments, my hope is we explain to people the construction of Congress, the role of political parties, how political parties evolve, the role of platforms, what this means, how candidates act, and our electoral system is a single-member district plurality system. Those structures of single-member district plurality versus multi-member districts, how that changes electoral outcomes, all of those things are facts. And that should be the foundation of many of these political science classes you have. It sounds really boring, right? But it will understand and help you understand how power is enacted inside a democracy and uniquely inside the democracy of the United States.
Lovely. Any other thoughts on that? I was like, no, we're not going to touch that one. Great. So thank you so much for that perspective. I think that was an acute question. I think what we would love to do, because we're running out of time, is I want to make sure we get to the resources and action items so that you can have those before you leave, and those at home can have that as well. But before we do that, can we get a round of applause for our panelists for answering some very courageous questions? What we will also do for the questions that were asked that we didn't get a chance to answer, we will make sure we have a frequently asked question list that we can provide information on our website as well, because your questions do matter. Okay. In transition and in closing, we want to make sure that you have resources, and we have a combination of resources that are internal and external to give you perspective. And there are QR codes on the screen, so if you scan these, while you scan those, I will allow some of our leaders here to share some of the resources available. So the first resource on the QR code is the Belonging Lab. So, Dr. Strayhorn?
Happily. If you are interested in learning more about the science of belonging, either reading academic papers or what I really enjoy writing most are sort of publicly accessible blogs and podcasts to talk about belonging and why it's important in very plain English. If you scan the QR code, go to the Belonging Lab, there's a whole list of resources there that I think empower people to understand that belonging is a feeling. That's the first thing. But it's a feeling that can't be forced. It's got to be facilitated and nurtured. We all play a role, especially at colleges and universities, regardless of our place and station. But here's the other thing that hasn't been said the way I want to hear it yet, and that is that we don't just foster conditions for belonging's sake, although that's important. We do want you to feel a sense of belonging. But the reason why I get excited about it, this is me excited, is because the evidence is very clear that when students feel a sense of belonging, they go to class. They lean in and engage in their learning. They retain more information, which means they do better in terms of their grades. If they do better in terms of their grades, they're retained semester to semester. Do it enough times, you're going to graduate. And then upon graduation, we don't have to beg you to come back to Austin Peay. You want to come back and tell other people about this experience you had. And so it becomes engaged alumni who become great ambassadors for the institution. And I think that, to me, is what makes belonging really, really worth it. Check out the Belonging Lab for that information.
Thank you. And then Cafe, with some of our questions are around how to engage faculty and staff in the classroom and what to do around resources. So I don't know, Dean Williams, do you want to provide any perspective as far as how students can use resources to be able to better understand how to find support and belonging and community within the classroom setting?
Yeah, I just think that the important part is to stay engaged with your faculty. Also, there are a variety of student organizations that are often linked. And if you happen to be interested in politics, just so you know, the political science department is having a series of events and speakers about global issues and a variety of other things that are ongoing. As I mentioned, they had the thing to watch the election, and they have a variety of things. So if this is something you're interested in and you want to find out more, take a political science class. It's not that scary. You'll learn a lot, and then you'll learn, I think, how to be a more effective citizen.
Thank you. Any thought process, Richard, around student involvement? Because I know that's one of the next slides, but how has SAC been helpful in creating belonging, at least from the athletic perspective, resources there?
I really do, especially with our international student. Actually, a recent story from one of our international students from Japan. He told us the transitioning for him was kind of rough in the beginning. And he brought up like our certain events we've hosted around for athletes and how he's gotten to meet other athletes and kind of give his authentic self to other people, and they got to learn about his culture as well as he got to learn as the culture here in Clarksville. And he's just talked about how that transition alone has helped him just feel at home in a way.
Love it. Thank you for sharing. And then not the worst case scenario, but making sure we're accountable. As I mentioned, it's our job to make sure we support and create environments where you feel like you can find a sense of belonging. And you received a lot of guidance and expertise and wisdom and stories around how that looked. But if for some reason you don't feel that, or you want to share things with us that might be helpful, we do have the QR code for some reporting mechanisms. And Dr. Gilmore, would you like to share a little more about what that QR code goes to?
Yeah, absolutely. So the QR code on the far right takes you to People's Dialogues Helpful Resources page. If you scroll down to the bottom of that, there's a myriad of reporting mechanisms that everyone has access to. Some are credentialed, some are not. So we have our Student of Concern form. We have a form to report any sort of violation of our divisive concepts law. We have our bias and harassment reporting form through OIC. And then we also have our, so OIC is our Office of Institutional Culture, for those that may not know. And then we also have our complaint and incident report form as well. So all of those don't just go into some random cloud and sit. They go into actual individuals' inboxes where we process those and work through them. So every single report that comes across is actually looked at and processed. So I think sometimes when universities administrators talk about reports and telling us about concerns you might have, the question is, well, what happens? Please know that I can speak from personal experience and from the work that we do and from my colleagues in the Office of Institutional Culture that every single report is looked at and processed. So.
Thank you. And then some additional resources we want to make sure we talk about. So community belonging and success, that is one of the areas within my portfolio as Assistant Vice President. Within our identity spaces, first, I want you all to know each one of those, the Career Success Center is the new name, our Latino Community Resource Center, our Adult Non-Traditional and Transfer Student Center, and the African American Culture Center. We all have Dr. Strayhorn's book. And so if you think about our spaces are inclusive. They're all open to anyone, regardless of your identity. And so if you want to have conversations, if you want to have leaders, if you want to have offices that model what this looks like, we have, under the leadership of Mr. Rashad Cockrell, who is the Community Belonging Director, has taken this text. And some of the things that Dr. Strayhorn has talked about as it relates to what are the outcomes and the impacts beyond feeling for creating belonging, we are modeling that in our office. We also recognize that while our offices are our identity spaces, we have intersecting identities, which means that regardless of how you identify, you can come into these spaces and you can find leaders similar to our offices and others that also have this approach. So our office is definitely one. I'm one of these leaders that is following this approach to create community and belonging and success. That's one. I think the Office of Institutional Culture, Dr. Gilmore talked about it. That is a space that is more broad across the campus that focuses on faculty, staff, students, and some other spaces where they also want to create a culture there. And then last but not least, it was mentioned already from SAC, but also in Dr. Gilmore's area, the way in which student life and engagement through our student organizations are creating space. So you want to mention anything about their ability to do that?
Just to echo kind of what you said, Dr. Clark, creating a sense of belonging where students can find, individuals or groups that they can authentically show up and be themselves. So not only in that office itself is that kind of in a way I feel like its own identity center where we have students gathering and showing up authentically, which I love to see. So if you've not checked out Student Life and Engagement on the second floor of the UC to the right, 211, still don't know room numbers, I'm sorry, 211, but the registered student orgs, so Dean Williams also talked about this. We've got, 120 plus, 140 plus student orgs that are identity-based, theme, topic, concern, attached to academics, all kinds of things. And here's the wonderful thing about it is that if there's a student org that doesn't exist, that students want to create, it's pretty darn simple to create it. I think you need yourself and 9 other friends and to create a constitution, and which we have some sample ones we can give you, and get some funding, and it's a pretty easy process to start a student org. So if you want something that we don't have, we can definitely help students figure that out. So.
Yep. And in closing, one of our strategic priorities, actually strategic priority number 2, is a community of belongingness. So our vice president has made that a priority strategically across our entire division, again, to prioritize what belongingness looks like across the division. Okay, so with that being said, we would love for you all to save the date. This was our last People's Dialogue for the fall series, but we want you to know that this is not the end. We are not doing this for the election. We're not doing this for the fall. This is a part of a continued series that will take place moving forward. We don't have dates yet, but the spring series will comprise of January, February, and March engagements. And those who are at home, if you can't see it, the January engagement will focus on voting rights and electoral integrity. February, we will be honoring Black Awareness and Black History Month by talking about equity and justice. Words don't work. And then in March, we'll focus on a combination of women's history and mental wellness. So if you are a leader, if you're a student leader, if you're a faculty leader, if you're a staff member, if you're a member on the call that wants to be a part of this engagement, we will be reaching out and looking for folks to engage. Without further ado, I would love to give one more round of applause to not only our panelists, but for you all that have joined this conversation. Again, I'm grateful for you taking the time to be here. I'm grateful for those who are watching online, and I'm grateful for your commitment to wanting to learn how to create a sense of belongingness post the 2024 election, and I'm optimistic and hopeful for the future. So enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and our panelists will stay around and probably take a couple photos. So if you would like to come up and say hello to them, please do. Sorry, those online. And thank you again, and have a great rest of your afternoon.